Jorge and Guillermo Diaz-Graham will enter their first year at Pitt as relative mysteries. Their late arrival to America and American basketball makes them somewhat of an unknown, especially to recruiting circles that are just starting to catch up with their evaluations of the twin big men. But both are young and talented players expected to be major parts of the future of Pitt basketball. So let's talk about the twins. Let's figure out where they fit in this year in the short term to Pitt's roster. I think it makes sense to start by talking about them as individual players because while they look alike, sport some similar builds, and were generally rated the same by those same recruiting services, they are different players by most accounts. Now I got to preface this by saying it's splitting hairs a little bit, especially when you consider how basketball is moving more towards a quote-unquote positionless kind of designations for its players. But mostly just away from the traditional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 designations for its positions and more towards kind of 3 categories: ball handlers, wings, and bigs. These two twins are definitely both bigs. I think that's pretty obvious based on the fact that they are 6'11" and 7 foot. But they do play a little bit differently on the floor. By most accounts, Jorge is a more traditional center, while Guillermo fits more of a stretch 4 mold, play on the perimeter a little bit more, shoots better, more of a better ball handler. These somewhat outdated terms will describe what you see on the court, but not necessarily how much either of them will play, or I guess I should say how their playing time affects who else factors in the rotation. But with that said, I think Guillermo's perimeter skills, particularly shooting, makes him a little bit of a better fit in my mind for what Pitt needs now. And just factoring in where these two are at in their developments and kind of in their basketball lives, a guy like Guillermo is more immediately ready to see time in high major college basketball, I think, than Jorge is. Both are taller than 6'11". Jorge is 6'11". Guillermo is 7 foot, and both weigh around 200 pounds, give or take. Jorge runs about 195, and Guillermo about 205, according to Pitt's roster. To that end, I think a guy like Jorge, who makes his living around the rim and in the paint, is a little bit further away from being ready to battle against high major competition, especially on the inside. I don't get it twisted. Guillermo will need to add weight as well, and a year of guidance from college coaching staffs about nutrition and weights will do wonders for both of them. I think that's part of why Pitt makes so much sense for them, for both of them, especially because they're both far from finished products. When you have a guy like John Hugley coming back to command a lot of floor time and attention in the front court, the Twins can be complementary to Hugley, who's kind of Pitt's centerpiece, especially in the front court. And again, the fact that Hugley is, again, a more traditional center, a back-to-the-basket type of player who scores on the inside with his post moves. He's got a growing outside game. He's a much better passer than he was when he first arrived at Pitt, but still, he makes his living around the rim and scoring with his back to the basket. So, that's why I think Guillermo, who plays a little bit more of the perimeter, can shoot, I think he's a better candidate to play off of Hugley. I think can find himself more in the rotation if he's able to do stuff like that and able to play off of Hugley's improved facilitating than a guy like Guillermo, who, again, a talented player, but might clog up the middle like we've seen in the past. Teams that have played Pitt, when Pitt hasn't had super strong shooting, they've been really able to just pack the paint and kind of zero in on. It was Pitt's guards for a while early in Jeff Capel's tenure, but now it is kind of just Hugley. But teams are able to pack the paint, send double teams, close off driving lanes, and force Pitt to make outside shots. So a guy like Jorge might only exacerbate that problem, at least at this juncture. So a guy like Guillermo can open things up. give Hugley some room to work and then play off of him. I think you also have to think about the backcourt depth when you think about how these two big men kind of fit into the short-term plan. If the Panthers decide to go small, guys like Nelly Cummings and Jamarius Burton and Mike Spondy and Nelly Cummings, Dior Johnson, Jamarius Burton, Nike Sponde, all those guys could kind of, if they're playing on the court at the same time, which I think is certainly possible, especially if Pitt wants to put, I would argue, their four of their most talented players on the court at the same time. Going small could crowd out minutes for big men, not just Diaz-Graham twins, but other guys further down the roster. Another factor is kind of some off the court stuff. I guess you could call it off the court stuff. Pitt's not in a normal situation right now. There's pressure on their head coach to win immediately. I think Jeff Capel knows that. I think most people who follow this team know that as well. Jeff Capel needs to win now. He needs to win immediately. He needs to stack wins immediately. And while he sort of has to think about the long-term health of the program, and kind of has to, I guess, operate like he assumes he is coming back, and assumes that he will be able to see the development of his young players through. He can't bank on that, and he knows that he has to stack wins now in order to see that through fruition, see that through. To that end, Capel has some decisions to make when he's thinking about roster construction and rotations, about balancing development with that urgent need to win now. I talked about this a little bit in an earlier video about Will Jeffress, but when you're talking about the competition for playing time, there are different things that you might want to value. So you have to compare the experience of a guy like Blake Hinson, who is a candidate to play in the front court and play a lot. He's 6'7", about 250 pounds, maybe a little bit more. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's a big dude. He's played at the Power 5 level before. He's definitely much more ready to defend and rebound at the high major level against ACC and Big Ten and SEC opponents, the type that Pitt are going to. Oh, and I guess a Big 12 opponent in West Virginia. He's much more ready for that challenge of playing against high major opponents immediately. But you balance that with the fact that maybe a guy like Guillermo or Jorge has a higher ceiling and are perhaps more talented than Hinson. Again, we're speculating a little bit, especially because Hinson hasn't played for 2 years, and we haven't seen much of Jorge and Guillermo, period, much less at the Division I level. So we're kind of has to extrapolate a little bit from the little that we do know. But there's also that size factor. How does Blake Hinson, who's only 6'7", compare to 6'11" and 7-footers? And who's going to be the better rebounder? Would you rather have a real solid defender who can body up versus players who can block shots with long arms and a lot of height? So if the goal is to stack, but the other thing is if the goal is to stack wins immediately, you don't have a ton of room for guys like Guillermo and Jorge to live through their growing pains, make mistakes that normal freshmen get to make throughout their development. To that end, you might go with a Blake Hinson, who you are probably more sure about what you're getting. Or maybe even you go with a Fede Federico or a William Jeffress, like I said. If you know what you're getting, you're kind of able to game plan a little bit better, especially if you're not. When your other options are two freshmen who you haven't been able to scout a ton, who have not played against Division I competition, and are a little bit of an unknown. But the good news is that it's basketball. So Jeff Capel not only has months of lead-up time to practice and see how the Diaz-Graham twins compare to the other Division I players that they are playing against, but you also have an easy out to watch them in live game action. You have a lot of games to play. and you can rotate them out of those individual games, but then also have a different approach to each game. You're going to play different opponents. You are not going to play, UNC every game, who has a really strong and athletic backcourt. You have games against North Florida, Northwest, or Farley Dickinson, or UT Martin, or even Northwestern. Maybe not as athletic a team, especially in the front court, as a UNC or a Duke or a Syracuse, or take your pick of anyone in the ACC. So you can kind of make these decisions on the fly a little bit, and if the Twins are ready right now, then great. Throw them out there, let them do their thing, and you have two really talented but young players ready to go immediately. On the flip side, if their bodies and their games need some time to round out and they need to acclimate themselves to high major basketball, that's fine too. Like I said, you have Hinson, you have William Jeffers, you have options. And Jeff Capel does not need to throw these guys out immediately if they're not ready for it. So the Diaz-Graham brothers are really nice insurance. And the good thing for them is they're not pieces that will be expected to make major contributions immediately. And I think that's a healthy way to approach this season for them in particular, and then their kind of development going forward. I think you can kind of temper expectations and let them play and see what they can do before you actually ask much of them at all.